Can I ask directors to take their seats, please? God, it feels like forever since we've... Good afternoon, everyone. I'd like to welcome everybody to our regular meeting of the Electoral Area Services Committee. And my name is Ian Morrison. I'm your chair. And I just, before we get started, like to note that this meeting is taking place on the traditional territory of the Coast Salish people. And with that, I believe, I don't have the notice to when our next, these things go to the board. 26th, thank you. Decisions from this committee will go to the board meeting on the 26th. And I'd like everyone to turn their attention to the agenda. And I note that there will be an addition to the agenda under closed session. It'll be CSNB 1. Mr. Carruthers has an item for us. The subject is legal, I believe. And is there anything else that the committee has for the agenda? Seeing none, could I have a motion to approve the agenda as amended? Moved by Director Barcott, seconded by Director Kuhn. Any discussion? We'll call the question. All those in favor? Those opposed? The motion carries. Minutes of our meeting of September 5th. Moved by Director Davis, seconded by Director Yanni DiNardo. Any discussion? Call the question. All those in favor? Those opposed? That motion carries. Mr. Blackwell, any business arising from those minutes?
There's no business arising.
Thank you. Now we come to number 4 on the agenda, the public input period, and we would invite anyone in the gallery here today who would like to provide some input to committee members on items on today's agenda. There you have our public input procedure policy on the walls, on the board. Would anyone like to provide input to committee today? I don't see anybody leaping up, so we will go on to the next item on the agenda. Is there any delegations, Mr. Blackwell? Doesn't look like it.
There are no delegations today.
No correspondence, straight to information. We have IN1, 2 items of minutes for information. Any discussion of any of the material in those minutes? Seeing none. Reports, Mr. McDonald.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. We're going to give you the August report for building inspections. This month, or August month, we had 37 issued, which averages 40, so we're on track of average, and that 40 is over the last 10 years. For future projects, we have quite a lot on the books. There's 81 total permits being processed right now, and 35 of them are single-family dwellings. For the month, we had 2.7 million in building value, and that brings our year total to just slightly over 58 million. For new housing starts, we had 6 in the month for 114 for the year, and total permits issued was 359 so far to date, and in the last calendar year, that brings us now to 528. And as I said last month, that is still generating about 4,000 inspections from all those permits. How those permits break down for the month, single-family dwellings was 8. We had 2 single-family demolitions. A lot of renos, 11 renos, 13 garages and or accessory buildings, 1 institutional, 1 industrial, and 1 barn. Challenges we had in August, more permits means more time in the field, so it's like a double-edged sword. The inspectors are on the road a lot more, so it's less time in the office, so it's presenting itself a bit of a challenge for us to overcome, but we're looking at ways of doing things more efficiently. We're also having a lot of things go to planning referrals, and my hat comes off to Keith's team as they've just recently addressed one of the problems that we were having, so it looks like we will be able to get our permits out a bit quicker. We've also had a bunch of building bylaw infractions, people building without permits, and unpermitted suites that we've had to deal with, as well as just general administration, which means a lot of phone calls, emails, dealing with engineers, and also with covenants. Here's my usual chart for stats, and Ian will be happy to note that for the month, he's at 14%. So anyway, all in all, generally was a good month. Any questions?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. In the paper that the Capital Regional District has had less new buildings, new residences, in the recent last couple months. And with the higher interest rates on the horizon, and with more restrictions on mortgages, tighter regulations on getting mortgages, can you see that that we are heading in that direction as well? I know we've been pretty good in the first part of the year, but this year, this part of the year, is it, when you look at your building permits, when you look at what's going on out there, can you tell whether we're trending down at the last part of the year or not?
I think yes and no, and why I would say that is that I think you saw even that month it was lower housing starts, although we do have 35 permit applications for houses. But overall, it's still fairly strong. But what we're also seeing is permits being very high as people are renovating their houses. A lot of people, I think that's higher than normal, is that people are just taking what they have and fixing up what they've got.
Mr. Blackwell.
Thank you. I think this is a really important question because the reality is that, in my opinion, the market dynamics in the Cowichan Valley are different than in Capital Regional District. The type of ownership pattern, I think, is different than down there, coupled with the average house price, which is more affordable in this region versus that region. I think we're going to still see a higher number of new starts as well as renovations for the foreseeable future. A lot of this is driven by folks retiring to this community rather than new families, moving out of the home and starting their own residence.
Any further questions for Mr. McDonald? Seeing none, thank you very much. Next item, Ms. Rondeau, R2.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Members. This is a development permit application that proposes to subdivide the approximately 5-acre or 2-hectare property into 22 residential lots and 1 park lot. The minimum parcel size of the R3 zone is 700 square meters when connected to sewer and water. The property has 1 dwelling and accessory buildings, which will be removed as part of the development. And there are cleared field and forest areas on the site. The property has frontage along Cowichan Bay Road, Simon Place, and direct access to the subdivision for the new residents will be from Rondo Road. Yeah. No, yeah, different name, spelling, no relation that I'm aware of, yeah. So here I've just provided some photos of the existing subdivision, and you can imagine that the proposed subdivision will essentially be an extension of this. To satisfy the development permit area guidelines, the applicants have supplied a rain and stormwater management study, which includes sediment and erosion control plan, as well as an environmental assessment has been provided. And they've proposed an agricultural buffer setback for buildings, as well as landscaping and natural vegetation. Rainwater management has been a concern in the area for development, and including the Ordano Road allowance. And the plan proposes to intercept and infiltrate water from the development, as well as upland properties to mitigate and improve the local conditions there with regards to rain and stormwater. The application complies with the development permit area guidelines, and staff are recommending approval of the application. The applicants are present and are available to answer any questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Rondeau. I'm going to turn to Director Yanni DiNardo first. I think she'd like to take a place on this.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I've spoken to the applicants, and we do have an issue in that development, and what you see with the APC notes that the configuration of the lot and the parks and trails would still like to have some connective trails as well that they've been working on quite a while. The community has, the Ordano Road is now in the hands of Ministry of Transportation. So I would like to move this with a third note on here as well, if I could. So a number 3 bullet.
I think we should probably have the number 3 bullet read out. Has it been provided to staff?
I will provide it to staff.
We will still need to have it read out, so
I can read it out.
well, what perhaps we'll do is we'll have, seeing you're not referring this, I think we should give committee members an opportunity to ask staff any questions if they're so inclined.
Okay.
So, Director Davis?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I was just wondering how the covenant and the no-build area would be enforced, and whether it would, how it could be more successfully managed than the development on Hayden Place that we've just had some issues with.
Yeah, thank you for the question. In this case, there will be a covenant that prohibits building within a certain distance from the rear parcel line, so that will set the home further away to begin with. And there will be some additional area behind the house as a result, which should provide people an opportunity to develop those portions of their property as a yard, because I think what we learned from Hayden Place is that people want to either landscape or use their lot to their full capacity. As well, we've taken some lessons too from that development in terms of ensuring that the replanting and the native vegetation gets placed prior to subdivision approval. And then lastly, as part of the development permit, it's going to include, and this came out of the Advisory Planning Commission, a recommendation that a bit of a pamphlet or like a letter be distributed or provided to subsequent landowners. So we're going to work with the applicants in the development permit stage to develop this pamphlet or handout, and that'll be a schedule to the development permit, so that in Area D, when people are coming forward for their development permits for their single-family dwellings, we have something that we can hand out to them that explains how the development was created and what their responsibilities are with regards to both rainwater management, because there will be a requirement to manage that on site, but also with regards to the agricultural buffer setbacks. So we're always trying to find new ways to improve kind of workflow and efficiency, and make sure that there are these things that we're informing the public of their responsibilities when they buy a lot there.
Follow up?
Thank you. Yeah, more education seems to be
try.
necessary. Also, will the houses all be built by one company, or the lot's going to be sold to various companies?
I'm not sure. I don't know.
Okay, thank you.
Director Yanni DiNardo?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This has been a contentious, it's just, there's a lot of moving parts on this, being away all of last week, and having the APC and the parks not quite happy with this. I would rather actually refer it back to staff so that we can clearly get this, refer it back to staff to continue the discussions with the applicant to find a mutual satisfactory park lot configuration for proposed lot 11 and connector trail, and bring it back to the next electoral area services in 2 weeks.
It's been duly moved and seconded. Call the question. All those in favor? Those opposed? The motion carries. Thank you, Ms. Rondo. Next item. Ms. Garnett. Welcome.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. So this staff report proposes an amendment to the Development Application Procedures and Fees bylaw. And this bylaw establishes the process for processing development applications and sets the associated fees. So the amendment proposes 4 changes. The first is to increase permit fees by $50, and that's to cover the costs incurred for registering those permits with the Land Titles Office. So this is not a new fee, it's basically just, our current process is once a development permit is approved, we have to register that permit on title with the Land Titles Office, and that there's a certain charge that we pass on to the applicants to cover that cost. The proposal would be to increase the fee to reflect the increased fee that the Land Titles Office charges, and then to charge that at the outset so applicants aren't coming into the office a second time to pay a second application fee. The second proposed amendment is to add an optional $25 fee to allow applicants to request a printed certificate of title with an application. I can explain these more in detail if you'd like, but they're relatively minor in nature, so I'll move forward quickly if that's okay. The third proposed amendment is to add a section to the procedures bylaw that would bring us into compliance with the Local Government Act, specifically with respect to landscape security calculations. And the fourth proposed amendment is to add agricultural protection guidelines in Area D to the list of delegated permits for general manager approval. And this is a minor maintenance item left over from when this bylaw was reformatted in May. So the recommendation is before you. Thank you.
Does the committee have any questions for staff? None. Mr. Blackwell, could you read the resolution, please?
Thank you. The recommendation before you is that Development Application Procedures and Fees Amendment Bylaw number 4235 be forwarded to the board for consideration of 3 readings and adoption.
Moved by Director Nicholson, seconded by Director Clement. Any further discussion? Seeing none, call the question. All those in favor? Those opposed? The motion carries. Thank you, Ms. Garnett. You're up again. R4.
Thank you. This report is revised landscape security policy. So in development services, we rely on this landscape security policy for development applications that involve landscaping, often for commercial or industrial developments, but also for restoration of natural areas. And this policy was originally approved by the board in 2012, and since then we've found potential improvements for it, which are proposed in this revision. The policy sets out the standards of the landscaping plans themselves, but also the process for requiring the financial security and returning that to the applicants afterwards. So the purpose of the policy revision was to improve the quality of the landscaping plans, but with a particular focus on the restoration plans for natural areas, because we seem to deal with those situations a lot, unfortunately. And secondary is to reduce the length of time a security is held to improve the efficiency at a staff level as a division level. So the revisions to the policy, we are raising the professional qualification. We are including monitoring and reporting in the cost estimate. We are reducing the length of time the security is held, and we are improving our requirements for the information necessary when restoration of natural areas is proposed in the landscape plan. Thank you.
Questions for staff? Director Acton.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So my question is, for certain instances, this might be quite punitive. I know for myself, I had to get a permit to cut down a tree in a riparian area that was being eaten by a beaver and was rotting. So then I had to hire a professional for $2,000. I had to do a replanting plan, which I used my art skills to do that, and that was approved. And it seems, whereas what's traditionally done in those areas is people just cut down the tree. So if we make some, for some instances, if we're putting more, like I'm just curious, it sounds great for a lot, but I think in certain instances, this might be a little extreme. And in my case, that adding this as well would have, for someone else, they wouldn't have bothered to get the permit and do everything.
Thank you. Director Dory? Oh, hang on, Mr. Blackwell.
Thank you. So through you to Director Acton, so, you know, point taken. Excuse me, it's hard to find or craft regulation that fits every different situation. But the intent of this is to better reflect, and I'm not going to suggest that it perfectly reflects, but better reflects the increasing propensity for this type of issue to present itself. And as this region continues to densify, the pressures become increasingly acute. The expectations of the community, I think, are increasingly loud with regard to protection and preservation of these riparian areas. So in order to be able to apply a general standard that achieves not best practice but good practice, we have to up the game with regard to some of the expectations around what's being required of these applicants. Of course, you know, as you point out, removing one tree is certainly entirely different than obliterating an entire SPIA, but the tools we have are proving, based on current day-to-day practice, proving to be completely insufficient, which is what is, you know, generating this report before you. That said, I don't see this as cemented or permanent. I think that this is something that we need to, at a staff level, operational level, continue to monitor, and as we see adjustments one way or the other that are going to better align with the expectations of the community, we will continue to bring these things back for committee's consideration.
Okay, I got a bit of a speakers list here. I've got Director Dory, Yenny DiNardo, myself, and Director Kuhn. Anyone else want on the list? Director Dory.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My question may be related, but distantly. We do a pretty good job of managing the landscape on new properties and collecting the fee to cover the costs if they don't do it properly. But in the ditches, the MOT land, it's a wild, wild west. There are willows growing in there. There's all kinds of stuff going on in the ditches in front of the properties. And in my area, there are some streets where everything is sort of landscaped like a city. In other areas, it's just a mess. And people don't do anything with the ditches in front. And it causes drainage problems and other things. The MOTI solution is to get an excavator in there and dig it out. And every time they dig it out, the ditch gets gets deeper and deeper that it'll lose a car. They're so deep. When there's only a trickle of water running down there, and they dig them deeper and deeper to get rid of the willows and the alder and whatever's growing in the ditch. Is it possible for an electoral area to move like a city does, say like Ladysmith does, if you don't maintain the front of your property between the road and your property, they will do it for you and they will charge you a fee. Is it possible to the staff that we can move in that direction and have a bylaw for certain types of properties? I'm not talking about a property that's 3 miles long. I'm talking about in residential areas, pick areas where the people have to maintain in front of their property. I had a guy phone me the other day, and he's down in the ditch digging, and I stopped to see how it's going, and he starts railing on me that we didn't clean out the ditches. And I told him it's not our responsibility, it's a Ministry of transportation's responsibility. Well, he wasn't having any of that. It was still partly our responsibility. So I still think it is partly our responsibility to see that our communities are looking good and they operate well and that sort of thing. So my question has a little bit to do with this, but not much. What can we do about it? Thank you.
So I'm going to take that one. The answer to your first question is no, and the answer to the second question is revamp the Local Government Act. So, enough said. Director Yanni DiNardo.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I really believe that this reflects the struggles that our area has been having, and this is going to be really helpful. So this is an improvement that we needed. Thank you.
I've got myself on the list next, and question is regarding the reduced time that the security is held. And I know that it's a little bit more of a burden to be having to hang on to these things, processing of the work and the likes, but I think the ultimate goal is that we want to see when landscaping is ordered, when it's done, that it actually survives. And so can you just share with us a little bit about the aspect of when it's returned after a year, what hope is there that we can expect that the owners are going to ensure that the investments that have been made continue to grow and thrive?
Yes, thank you. We certainly considered this aspect and the pros and cons of 1 year versus 2 year timeline. Partly, one aspect of the revision to the policy is to get more details in with respect to the watering schedule. So once an applicant has put the money into getting the plants into the ground, and if they've shown success after 1 year and they have a watering schedule, there's enough confidence that that will last another year. They're not necessarily going to undermine that work after they put in all that investment. There's also more of a financial reward for them because in the existing policy, which we're proposing to revise, 30% of the bond would be returned after the landscaping was complete, and now 50% will be returned. So they're going to get more money back sooner, and then the full 100% will be returned after the 1 year. And different local governments it varies the approach, the 1 to 2 years, and we believe there is enough merit to try this 1 year approach.
Thank you, Director Kuhn.
I would like to get back to Director Acton's example, and it's a perfect example as to what I'm really dissatisfied with this whole policy of riparian area protection. And so here is an example where somebody with one tree to be cut down had to spend $2,000 to get that okayed. We have other examples and very glaring examples where a whole shoreline was taken out and a whole number of trees were taken out, and all they get is, well, we have to replant. There's absolutely no relationship in some of the occurrences with regard to cleaning out riparian areas or just cutting down one tree. There's no relationship to that at all. And to me, it is just so bloody dissatisfying. It just bothers me immensely because there's one property well known on Cowichan Lake that's been cleared, and there were machines in there overnight, and what is the result? Well, yeah, they have to replant. Well, it would have been better for Director Acton to just have cut down the tree, never told anybody. Nobody would know the better, and she would have saved $2,000. So this is what bothers me. It seems we concentrate on the little guy, on the person that just wants to cut down one tree, or that maybe wants to have a little bit of an extension of a beach or whatever, and we come hard on these people. But the big ones that really do a lot of damage, they get away with murder. So tell me how this makes sense.
Mr. Blackwell.
Thank you. I'm not entirely sure how best to answer that. So it's pretty clear the sense or desire to see greater efficacy around protection of the SPIA. And I think to a person, staff would tell you that if they could, they would love to see the Local Government Act amended to provide greater legal latitude to deal with issues such as this. But the fact of the matter is, we are limited by our legal authority. Property owners are allowed to clear their land, so long as it doesn't coincide with the SPIA. That's the way it is, whether we like it or whether we don't like it, whether it creates erosion problems or whether it doesn't. That's the reality. It's different in a municipality where a municipality is enabled to enact a sediment erosion control bylaw, or a tree cutting bylaw, which starts to address some of the issues of land clearing that you're referring to. But we don't have that latitude. We have some pretty blunt tools that we're able to use. And I would suggest that in regional districts that are quite unpopulated, those authorities might be sufficient. But in those regional districts, such as the Cowichan Valley, and the Cowichan Valley might be the most acute regional district with regard to these density challenges, it becomes increasingly evident with respect to the deficiencies that the Local Government Act present when it comes to managing these issues. The amendments before you are meant to help address, as imperfect as they are, help address some of the operational deficiencies that staff encounter every day. But as I mentioned earlier, this is not expected to be perfect or deal with all of the issues, but you know, we have to work with what we have. We don't have any provisions or metrics to say, well, if you move this many trees, you don't need to bother, and unless they're of this diameter or this size, or it becomes so incredibly complex and subjective that we end up chasing our tail. So hopefully that clarifies it a little bit.
Follow up, Director Kuhn?
Yes, I wasn't referring to land clearing. I'm perfectly aware that yes, you can do with your land just about anything you want to, but I'm talking about riparian area. And in the case that I was mentioning, a whole riparian area for hundreds of feet was cleaned out, bush and trees and everything. And so that is, to me, I mean, I've had so many people call me or talk to me and say, well, what are you guys doing about this? And I can't even give them an answer. Well, we're replanting. Well, I mean, that is such a there's, as I say earlier, there's no relationship between the one and the other.
Mr. Conway?
Yes, but if I can make a couple of comments on this. When it comes to the small landowner wanting to remove one tree, we do apply a little bit of flexibility there. I can't speak to Director Acton's situation, but we do periodically get requests to remove danger trees where there's a dead tree, or maybe the tree's been eaten by a beaver or something like that. And in those cases, we don't require the full-blown development permit. We require an arborist report that would confirm that the tree is in fact a danger tree, because sometimes we do get people that will claim a tree is a danger tree when it's not, just because they want to remove it for a view or something like that. If we went entirely by the book with those situations, we would be saying you have to hire a qualified environmental professional, get a report done, apply for a development permit, go through the long drawn-out process of getting a development permit. The policy that's before you, I think, is partly motivated by the situation that Director Kuhn has brought up, where there was clearing done, and the property owner did not engage a proper landscape professional to prepare a restoration plan, and we found that our policy was inadequate, so that this policy will actually help with these situations where people have done extensive clearing of their riparian area, and will be able to insist that a proper landscape professional be involved, and that we have proper security provided to make sure that the replanting gets done. So it's the system is far from perfect, and there's all sorts of issues, and we don't have the proper authorities to really deal fully with situations where people clear their riparian areas. But this policy is one small improvement that we can make, and I think it's a good thing. So.
Final follow-up, I'll go to Director Nicholson next. Go ahead, Director Kuhn.
Thank you. I think this warrants a really good discussion, so I'm glad it's coming up. So when we talk about riparian areas, the one thing that is at the top of the list is bush and trees where the branches hang over the water, because that's what the fish need. And that's where the emphasis is. Now, if you have a tree that is, let's say, 10 meters back from the lakeshore, it has absolutely nothing to do with fish or anything. It just sits there and somebody just wants to cut it down. So here's my question. Let's say that person just goes ahead and cuts the tree. And somebody goes to the CVID and says, oh, he did that. So what is the consequence?
I don't see anybody jumping up here. Mr. Conway?
Like any bylaw enforcement issue, there's varying consequences. There would be an assessment made and a determination as to how serious the infraction was, and if it was, one of the common approaches to dealing with that is if there's been, if it's felt that there's been some level of damage done to the riparian area, then the applicant's informed that they have to hire a professional, go through the development permit process, likely do some restoration work to deal with it. If there's some minor pruning and it's deemed to be not a significant damage to the riparian area, there are situations where we don't pursue it because it's a minor infraction. We don't go after every single infraction that we come across. So, not sure if that clarifies it, but it really depends on the extent of the damage that's being done.
Thank you. Director Nicholson?
Just one comment through you to Director Kuhn. Trees back from the riparian area are important for stabilizing and filtering water. They're not just there for our enjoyment, or to prevent someone from seeing what they want to see. I'm wondering about this 2-year thing. I'm concerned about making it 1 year because our climate is changing rapidly now, and we have no real idea what plants are going to do particularly well in the future. And we have water issues, so I don't think watering everything is the answer. And I think that you should at least need to go through 2 growing seasons with species to understand if it's going to be successful or not. And I think that we have to be flexible and be prepared for failures in the future. So I don't think cutting it back to a year is a good idea. I'm wondering, I have a question for Mr. Blackwell, I think. I'm wondering about this land clearing issue because, the previous application was for a subdivision, which it's clear they're just going to go in there and clear it, take the whole forest down and start again. And I really don't think we can afford to be cutting down trees, particularly when we have issues around erosion. We have issues about heat in the summertime now, and trees are very important for heat mitigation. And just, what can we do? Can we have a development permit area when you want to do a subdivision? You have to keep the trees and have a plan to work around trees at all, or?
Mr. Blackwell?
Thank you. It's a really, really good question. With this issue, boy, oh boy, it makes me appreciate what a great spot municipalities are in when it comes to managing this issue. I think there are solutions that could be considered by the committee, the board. I'd want to reflect on the full scope and implications of those. I would also say that I would expect some in the community to be put off by their ability to clear land because traditionally it's been an unfettered right, essentially. So there are lots of moving pieces to how we might go about doing that, from understanding the various regimes that could be applied through, say, development permit areas, and the extent that they could be applied to, but also public information campaigns and so forth. We, as a regional district, don't do anything to educate the people about the value of maintaining tree canopy and so forth. I'm not talking about, carbon sequestration. I'm talking about, protecting the groundwater by reducing evapotranspiration and so on and so forth. We don't do any of that. So there are lots of different tools that could be explored. We've not done that simply because of the fact that we have other work priorities on our plate that have taken our attention. That said, I think this is worthy of putting on our radar so we can bring it forward for a committee's consideration with regard to priority setting for our work plan.
Follow up?
Well, I couldn't agree with you more. I mean, we have our forested areas, you know, if we have a 50-year-old Douglas fir tree, it grew up in a climate, you know, starting 50 years ago, and we're going to have a completely different climate moving forward. So we already see cedars dying all over the place, so we're losing our trees, and, you know, yes, it's important to replant, but we should be trying to protect as much cover at this point as possible, I would think. So I would think it should be a priority, and hopefully it's a priority in the official community plan review that we're doing in Area E.
Drawing a blank, have we moved and seconded this policy yet? You have a question? Is it regarding the policy? Yeah. Excellent. Director Acton.
It's kind of the policy. I'm just curious about the landscape security. Is it actually large enough for, I know back to my tree thing, I had to create a plan and get a cost estimate for 4 shrubs, I think it was. And luckily I didn't have to put a deposit, but I don't think it would have been very significant. So is it designed to be enough money to motivate people to actually replant and come back for their money?
Ms. Garnett.
So the way the security is calculated, it's based on a cost estimate provided by the applicant, and it would include all the labor and materials, and the monitoring and reporting required to ensure that the landscaping plan is implemented. And then we ask for 125% of the value of that cost estimate and to a minimum of $2,000.
So really the answer is no. Mr. Blackwell.
Thank you. I'm going to have to defer to Mr. Conway as well on this in case he may know, but there are limits available to local government, upper limits with regard to establishing security. In other words, you can't pull the numbers out of a hat. You can't just randomly assign values. There has to be a reasonable, rational basis to assign these values. The additional money that Ms. Garnett is speaking to, in other words, 25% in excess of the estimated value, is essentially designed to cover administration costs that would not be captured in the cost estimate of replacing some of that vegetation. But it can't go so far as to add on, however you'd want to call it, an incentive cost as well. So increasing the value to, say, 300%, with the balance being pure, inspiration to get it done. It has to be based on a viable cost estimate, and I believe there's case law on this, but I'd have to double check. I don't know if Mr. Conway has any further information or not on that.
Mr. Conway.
Yes, that's my understanding as well. And general fees and any charges related to this sort of thing have to be sort of based in the actual cost and not sort of inflated to a subjective number. So fees for applications need to be based on the cost of actually processing those applications. They can't be in excess of that. And the same principle applies, I believe, to security amounts for landscaping.
Thank you. And just an added note, in the time that I've been here, this 125% figure has just been woefully inadequate, at least from sitting at this table. And there's another local government act restriction that we can't work around. Director Nicholson.
I'd be prepared to move this if the period was extended back to the 2 years.
We're going to move her in a seconder with I guess that's amending the content I think the resolution can be the same, but it's the material in the report that's different. I've got a mover and a seconder, just hang on, how would we, Mr. Barry, how would you suggest we deal with this?
Mr. Chair, I would move an amendment motion to amend the policy by whatever you wish, and then you'll do this recommendation that the landscape security policy as amended be forwarded to the board.
Thank you. So Director Nicholson, are you moving that the policy be amended to put it back to 2 years? And were you seconding that? So we've got an amendment to move it back to 2 years. Do any staff want to weigh in on this? So I've got Director Clement wanting to weigh in on this. Go ahead.
I'm opposed to this just because I've been so involved with some of the developments in our areas that holding on to that money for a larger development may not seem like a larger thing, but for some of the smaller businesses that have to follow this, that money sits around, and quite often they are borrowing that money and it collects interest, and it's not like they get that interest back after everything's said and done. And so I think 1 year is more than adequate if they've shown what they're doing, and we need to keep in mind that an extra year of interest on a $10,000 deposit is something, and so that's also money that they're unable to access. So I'm against it for that reason.
Thank you. Director Yanni DiNardo to the amendment.
Yeah, I believe that 2 years, a growing season would be preferred than the one. And I've seen a lot of cases in a lot of the planting, so it's important.
Director Nicholson on the amendment.
Maybe it would be helpful to, instead of saying 2 years, to say 2 growing seasons, because we're doing the monitoring. You know, you don't have to wait for a full 2 years if you just want to get it at the end of the growing season.
I would strongly suggest we don't complicate things by growing seasons, because different plants have different growing seasons and the like. So looking around the room, any further discussion on the amendment? Director Acton.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm happy with either 1 or 2 years. If we could possibly bring this conversation back to the new board, along with more of a greater picture of strategy around riparian and bringing all those things together, because I think that's what people are really concerned about here.
Well, that's a fantastic opportunity for you to bring that back when you're reelected and bring it forward to the committee, and we can discuss this again. Call the question on the amendment, which is essentially keeping the 2-year period. All those in favor? Those opposed? That motion carries. On the amended recommendation, Mr. Blackwell, would you please, we don't have a mover and a seconder yet. Moved and seconded. Mr. Blackwell, would you read the recommendation?
So the recommendation before you would be that it be recommended to the board that the amended landscape security policy included as attachment B to the Services Division September 4th, 2018 staff report be approved, and that the landscape security policy dated December 12th, 2012 be repealed.
Any further discussion? Seeing none, call the question. All those in favor and those opposed? The motion carries. That item will go to the 26th meeting as well. Thank you, Ms. Garnett. Mr. Blackwell, any unfinished business?
There's no unfinished business?
No new business.
And there's no new business?
I'd like to invite anyone from the gallery that has any questions about agenda items today to step forward and ask a question of the chair.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chair. I was pleased to see the revisions to the landscaping policy. My question is, when it comes to land clearing, there is in some development permit areas a requirement for the applicants to obtain a development permit area before doing land clearing. Why can that not be extended to residential properties?
I'm going to have to get back to you with an answer on that.
Thank you. And the 2 years is good. My only other question related to the landscaping, is there any way to ensure that the landscaping survives beyond 2 years, because generally once the applicants, and not all, but there are some, once they get their security back, the irrigation that's been provided is turned off.
I'm not sure of any tools in our toolbox that makes that possible. I've seen dead hedges all around the region, and it seems that the maintenance of landscaping that's required as part of a rezoning or a development permit isn't necessarily maintained after that 2-year period. We can look into that.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Mr. Chair, I am Cliff Evans from Shawnigan Lake.
Welcome, Mr. Evans.
Mr. Chair, on the landscaping, there's a lot of problems in the residential areas, I think, with people planting a nice little Christmas tree, and about 50 years later, the thing's up about 60, 70 feet, robbing light away from them. And if you have solar panels, they're taking your energy away from your solar panels. The trees also are sometimes planted on fence lines, and so the branches extend over the years over the neighbor's driveway. And in the wintertime, snow builds up on those branches. So if you want to clear the driveway out, you have to take your life in hand, fearing ice or snow falling off the branches. There's also branches coming off the trees in windstorms that can go right through a roof, a duroid roof. And so also other people are planting their nice little Christmas trees on their lot line in front of their house, but above it is a hydro line. And again, in 50, 60 years, they become a problem with shorting out the hydro lines. Mr. Chair, is there any way we can look at the landscaping bylaws to ensure that people aren't planting grand fir trees that get out of control, or other trees that grow 50 to 60 meters high on a lot and inconvenience and put the neighbors in danger?
Short answer, my understanding of that sort of intrusion into individual property rights isn't something that we've considered in the past. I was wondering where you knew of 50 and 60-year-old solar panels, but regardless of that, if you think that that's something that this committee should look at, I would suggest that you speak to your director and have them bring it forward as a priority and see whether or not it gains any traction when we do priority setting in the next term.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. It would be nice if, when looking at these new subdivisions, we can specify the type of tree if we see a hydro line underneath it, or it's right next to someone's driveway or to a ditch, or wherever a root may grow or snow may drop. It would be wonderful to see that in a bylaw.
I understand what you're getting at, and it makes sense in a lot of more developed, more densified urban settings. I think I would run into a whole bunch of difficulty in my community if I tried to bring forward initiatives such as that in a rural electoral area. But we've heard you, and we can perhaps bring this forward at committee priority setting in the new term.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Evans. Anyone else like to comment? We've got a few minutes left. Or, pardon me, not comment, question. Seeing none, thank you very much. Next item is motion to move into closed session under Chapter 4, moved and seconded. I have to read this part. Division 3, Section 90, subsections is noted with each agenda item. Call the question, all in favor? Those opposed, motion carries. Reconvene at 2:30. Yeah, but